Imagine writing a story in your spare time. You post it piece by piece to a corner of the internet known for its terrifying tales. The story goes viral. So viral, in fact, that the biggest streaming giant on the planet takes notice. Before your story is even bound in a real book, Netflix swoops in and cuts you a check for over $1 million. That is the true backstory of Old Country, a folk horror novel set in the vast, isolated wilderness of the Idaho mountains. It's a story with a premise so good, it commanded a Hollywood price tag before the public could even read it. But I've been in the horror game long enough to know that hype is cheap and a big budget doesn't guarantee quality. When a deal like that happens, it forces a very serious question. Did Netflix get scammed? Alright, so to understand what makes this book tick, you first have to understand the trap that is laid. And every good trap needs bait. The bait here is the American dream. Our main characters are Harry and his wife Sasha. They're living in Colorado, feeling crushed by the city, by the cost of living, which I'm sure is relatable for everyone, and by the sheer noise of modern life. They dream of escaping, of finding a piece of land they can call their own. A place to be self-sufficient, quiet, and free. And then they find it. A remote 75-acre property nestled deep in the mountains of Idaho, just outside the real-life towns of Driggs and St. Anthony. It's got a cabin, a barn, a pond, everything they ever wanted. And for a price that seems too good to be true. Sight unseen, they sell everything they own, pack up their lives, and they make the move. And of course, the price is too good to be true. Soon after they arrive, their only neighbors, an old weary couple who have lived on the adjacent property for decades, they come and they pay him a visit. And this isn't a welcome to the neighborhood chat with a basket of muffins. It's a warning. They explain that the valley, this specific land, isn't normal. It's governed by something ancient, a presence, a spirit, and it demands things. See, there are rules, they say, and survival depends on following them to the letter. Every single season brings a new trial and ritual that must be performed. They give them the rules for the first season. They say, all right, at some point during spring, you will see a strange light in the center of your pond. The moment you see it, you must light a fire in your house. If you're too slow, you'll begin hearing drumming in the hills. And if you hear drumming, you've failed. You've angered the land. And you don't want to anger it. Harry, a former Marine and a hardened skeptic, thinks it's a ridiculous local prank, a hazing for the new city folks. But Sasha isn't so sure. And then comes the final soul-crushing rule. The one that turns their dreams into a cage. You can never leave. Once you buy the land, the spirit owns you. If you try to run, it will hunt you down and kill you. Their beautiful 75-acre slice of freedom is now an inescapable prison. The story that follows is their first year in that prison, a trial by fire through 4 seasons of escalating, bizarre, and terrifying events. It's a masterful, chilling premise. But a story isn't just premise. It's the execution. And that is where things get complicated. All right, so we have this fantastic high-stakes premise. But ideas are one thing and execution is another. And I want to be very clear. There are parts of this book that are exceptionally well executed. The authors, brothers Matt and Harrison Query, they prove they absolutely know how to write suspense. First, let's talk about the atmosphere. They do a masterful job of taking a beautiful, idyllic landscape and making it feel menacing. There's this oppressive weight to the silence of the valley. The way the wind through the pines starts to sound less like nature and more like whispers. They capture that specific dread that, just comes with true isolation. The feeling of being the only 2 people for miles, where no one can hear you scream because there's no one else to listen. The beauty of the landscape becomes a silent, ever-present threat. Watching and waiting. It's a textbook example of how to build psychological tension. But their single most effective tool for building suspense is the family dog. Using an animal as a supernatural barometer is a classic horror trope, but it's rarely done this well. Dash is the story's early warning system. Long before Harry and Sasha feel anything is wrong, the dog knows. He'll stop dead on a walk, a low growl rumbling in his chest at something unseen in the trees. He'll refuse to go outside after dark, pressing himself against a doorframe and whining. The authors repeatedly describe the fur on his back bristling with a fear that the human characters can't yet comprehend. This is such a smart narrative device because it validates the threat for the reader. We trust the animal's instincts. So when Dash is terrified, we become terrified. He builds the suspense for us, putting us on edge moments before the actual horror of the scene even begins. It's skillful, effective, and easily one of the strongest parts of the book's writing. And just as you get comfortable with the creeping atmospheric dread, the book throws you a complete curveball with the summer season. This is where the story pivots from subtle whispers to a full-blown surreal spectacle. It's no longer just a feeling of being watched. It's being forced to watch something impossible. See, the rule for summer is simple. Don't let the man being pursued by a bear reach you. One day, Harry and Sasha hear a commotion. What they see is both unnerving and bizarre. A completely naked man bursts out of the tree line, sprinting across their property in sheer terror. He's panicked and desperate, and right behind him in hot pursuit is just this massive hulking black bear. It feels like a fever dream. The book presents it as this recurring ritualistic chase that plays out on their front lawn. It's deeply unsettling because it's not just a monster trying to get in, it's a private, horrifying play they are forced to witness. The man and the bear are the actors in a drama they don't quite understand, and Harry and Sasha, they're the captive audience. See, day after day, they participate in this bizarre sequence. The man races towards their home, the bear in tow, and Harry puts the man out of his misery before the bear drags the lifeless body back to the woods. But Harry is a douche, and quite the idiot. He decides he's had enough of the games. Instead of shooting the man, he grabs his rifle, takes aim, and shoots the bear instead. See, he thinks he's doing the right thing, but he's actually committing a form of blasphemy. He's interfered with the ritual. The moment the bear is wounded and flees their property, the spirit of the land retaliates, and the payoff is twofold. First, the immediate negative reaction from the land shows that these aren't random events. They are sacred in their own twisted way. Second, their dog has an incredible reaction. Instead of being relieved, he becomes hostile towards Harry and drags the man's body back towards the woods, as if to say, "You broke the rules. This is not how it's supposed to work. I now have to fix your mistake." It's a brilliant moment that elevates the dog from a simple protector to a creature that understands the rules of the land better than the humans do. It establishes that the goal isn't to fight the land, but to appease it, making the horror much more complex than a simple monster story. That skill, however, reaches its absolute peak during the final season. If you take one thing away from this video, let it be this. The scarecrow sequence in Old Country is a masterclass in horror. See, by this point in the book, the couple has survived spring and summer. They understand the rules are real. Then one day, a scarecrow appears in their field. One they didn't put there. It's just standing there, propped up on a crude wooden cross, its burlap sack head tilted at a disturbingly human-like angle. The rule for this season is just as bizarre as the others. They have to move it at least 20 feet from where it appeared and then burn it. See, the first couple of times this happens, it's pure psychological terror. The act of approaching this thing, this effigy, and having to interact with it is completely unnerving. Harry will poke it, and it just collapses into a lifeless pile of hay and old clothes. But then comes the third scarecrow. This time, it's different. As Harry drags the heavy thing across the field, it begins to struggle against him. It's not just dead weight anymore. He hears a voice, a dry, raspy sound, coming from its burlap head. whispering to him. And then it attacks. This isn't a ghost. This is a physical, brutal assault. The book describes in visceral detail how this thing, filled with nothing but hay and malice, wraps its straw-stuffed arms around Harry's neck and begins to choke him with impossible strength. It's a grotesque, terrifying image. A man being murdered by a scarecrow, his life being squeezed out by something that shouldn't have even been able to move him. It's a raw, violent, and absolutely frightening image. That scene is the book's high watermark. It proves, without a doubt, that the authors have the chops to write truly great horror. It's just a shame that the rest of the book couldn't maintain this level of terrifying invention. Okay, a handful of brilliant, terrifying scenes, a great atmosphere. So why did I finish this book feeling so unsatisfied? Because those moments of brilliance are islands in a sea of deep structural problems. A few great chapters simply cannot save a book from its fundamental flaws. And Old Country has 3 of them, and they're all quite significant. Let's start with our main character, Harry. Now, a protagonist doesn't have to be likable, but they do have to be compelling. They have to drive the story. Harry does the opposite. For the first half of this book, he's a narrative black hole that just sucks all momentum out of the plot. He's written as a former Marine, which the book uses to justify his extreme skepticism. The problem is, it goes far beyond skepticism into the realm of unbelievable, frustrating denial. When his neighbors, who have lived there for decades, give him a solemn, serious warning, he immediately writes them off as crazy country folk playing a prank. Fine. A little arrogant, but believable. But then the light appears in the pond, exactly as they described. Instead of considering the possibility, he doubles down, convinced his neighbors are using high-tech projectors, and he sets up trail camps. He's proven wrong, of course. His neighbors are like 85 years old. Then he witnesses the surreal horror of a naked man being chased by a bear, exactly as described. His reaction? Still convinced it's an elaborate trick. This isn't a character flaw. It's a narrative stall tactic. The story can't progress because the main character refuses to participate in it. We, the readers, are waiting for him to catch up to a reality that has been repeatedly proven to him. His stubbornness doesn't build suspense. It creates tedium. A character's flaws should complicate the story, not hold it hostage. Here, it just makes you want to skip chapters until he finally accepts the premise of his own book. And I need to call something else out. As the spouse of someone in the military, with close friends who've all served, I found Harry's portrayal really frustrating. His PTSD isn't the problem in itself. In fact, that could have added a compelling layer of tension to the story, but it felt really mishandled here. He just comes across as a douche, and I know I keep going back to that word, but honestly, it's so fitting, because he doesn't have much nuance, and there's no real understanding of what PTSD actually looks like. It felt like the authors knew some buzzwords and then threw them in wherever they could, rather than really digging into what the experience might be. Sasha, she didn't quite land for me either. She's written as this ideal, endlessly supportive, sexy wife who never seems to have her own reactions or frustrations. She doesn't feel like a real partner who's grappling with the reality of Harry's trauma. She's just a stand-in until the end of the book, where her role finally expands. And that's a shame, because the core idea of a couple trying to build a life in a place that absolutely doesn't want them there, it's fantastic. But their dynamic just never felt believable, and that took away some of the emotional weight the story could have had. The book's second and arguably biggest sin is its lazy approach to lore. Great folk horror is built on a foundation of history and belief. The horror feels real because the traditions, however twisted, they feel real. Old Country completely fumbles this. The book presents us with a series of bizarrely specific rules. Light the fire when you see the light to avoid the drumming. Burn the scarecrow 20 feet away. Now, I'm not saying that all lore needs to be explicitly spelled out. I don't need to know every detail of the history of the land, but it does leave a lot to be desired here. Some movies and books can pull it off. Robert Eggers' The Witch and The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson are just two that come to mind. There's mystery around the horror that is never fully explained, and you don't feel unsatisfied because of it. It's part of the brilliance of those stories. Then we have some other great works of the genre that they do give us that background. Midsummer gives us the detailed generation traditions of Harga? I don't know, however the hell you pronounce it. The Wicker Man is rooted in a specific interpretation of Celtic paganism. Even a modern creature feature like the Ritual grounds its monster in legitimate Norse mythology. That specificity makes the threat feel ancient, intelligent, and earned. Old Country's explanation, when it finally comes, essentially boils down to, it's a spirit. It's been here a long time. That's it. It's a massively missed opportunity. There's even a Native American character named Joe who could have been a source of history and deep lore, but he's relegated to a tired, mystical guide trope who only appears at the very end to dump exposition. See, the lack of a coherent history makes this spirit feel less like an ancient, terrifying god and more like a video game boss with arbitrary mechanics. Either make it a complete mystery or at least shine a light on it. And that brings us to the final nail in the coffin, the ending. After spending hundreds of pages establishing this powerful, external physical threat, the book abandons its own genre at the finish line. The entire conflict is resolved in what amounts to the last 15 minutes of the story. And it's resolved not by confronting the spirit, but through a sudden pivot to psychological self-help. The story concludes that the real monster was Harry's inability to process his trauma from the Marines. Once he has an emotional breakthrough, the spirit of the land basically says, cool, we're good now. And then the threat just evaporates. Let me be clear, exploring trauma through horror can be incredibly powerful, but it has to be earned. You can't spend 95% of your book telling me the monster is a literal, physical entity that will choke me with a scarecrow, only to turn around in the last chapter and say, just kidding. The real horror was the friends we made along the way. It feels like a cheat. It feels like the authors wrote themselves in a corner with a threat too big to defeat, and this was their easy way out. It's a thematically disconnected and deeply unsatisfying conclusion to an otherwise promising setup. So that brings us back to the million-dollar question we started with. Looking at the brilliant scenes, the frustrating protagonist, the lazy lore, and that maddeningly abrupt ending, did Netflix get scammed? My verdict is no, they didn't get scammed. The novel isn't great, but then again, they didn't buy the novel. They bought a phenomenal pitch. They bought a fixer-upper with fantastic bones. Just think about it. The seasonal structure is perfect for an episodic TV series. The set pieces, the bear chase, the scarecrow attack, they're incredibly cinematic and will look amazing on screen. Netflix didn't invest $1 million in a finished story. They invested in a high concept idea and a handful of killer scenes that they knew a professional writer's room could build upon. The job of that writer's room will be to fix everything we just talked about. They'll have to deepen the lore, give the world a history that makes sense, and most importantly, rewrite the character of Harry to be someone audiences can actually tolerate, if not root for. They have the opportunity to build a coherent, satisfying ending that the book itself fails to deliver. As a novel, Old Country is a frustrating mix of brilliance and mediocrity. It scratches the folk horror itch, but you'll need to be able to forgive major structural flaws for a genuinely terrifying couple of scenes. Now, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends, family, and even your enemies. Just please, no ancient spirits. And of course, if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button because every subscriber inches me one step closer to taking over the Galaxies. Until next time, take care, keep reading, and I'll see you in the next one.